Picture this, 87,000 Roman soldiers, the largest army Rome had ever assembled, marching onto a field in southern Italy, absolutely certain they were about to crush Hannibal once and for all. By sunset, 70,000 of them were dead. The survivors would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain how it happened. This wasn't just defeat, it was annihilation. A massacre so perfectly orchestrated, so brilliantly executed, that military academies still teach it 22 centuries later as the textbook example of tactical genius. And one man designed every single move. August 216 BC. Rome had reached its limit. For a year, they'd watched Fabius Maximus shadow Hannibal across Italy, avoiding battle, playing it safe. The strategy was working. Hannibal couldn't force a decisive engagement, couldn't capture major cities, couldn't break Rome's will. But it was also humiliating. The people were furious. Their farms were burning. Their allies were defecting. And Rome, proud, martial Rome, was running away from a barbarian invader. The Senate made a decision that would change everything. They abandoned caution. They appointed 2 new consuls for 216 BC with a single mission: find Hannibal and destroy him. Lucius Aemilius Paulus was the careful one. Experienced, aristocratic, he'd served under Fabius and understood the value of patience. His co-consul, Gaius Terentius Varro, was his opposite. Aggressive, populist, burning with the need to prove Roman superiority through decisive action. And the Senate gave them the tools to do it, 8 full legions plus allied. The armies met near Cannae, a small town in southeastern Italy. The battlefield was relatively flat and open, exactly the terrain where traditional Roman tactics dominated. Where their heavy infantry could deploy in their standard formation, a massive rectangular block designed to simply push through enemy lines through weight, discipline, and unstoppable momentum. August 1st, the armies faced each other across the field. But they didn't fight. Under Roman custom, the 2 consuls alternated daily command. It was Paulus's day and he wasn't ready. He wanted more time to prepare, to study Hannibal's positions, to make sure everything was perfect. August 2nd was Varro's turn. And Varro wanted battle immediately. No more delays. No more caution. Today Rome would end this. Hannibal's deployment was strange. Wrong even. Almost suicidal. He placed his weakest troops, 20,000 Gallic and Spanish infantry, right in the center of his line. These weren't his elite soldiers. They were the least disciplined, least experienced troops in his army. And instead of arranging them in a straight line like any sensible commander, he deployed them in a pronounced bulge that projected forward toward the Romans. This meant his weakest soldiers, positioned in his most vulnerable point, would make contact with Rome's heaviest infantry first. It made no sense. On the flanks of this bizarre center, Hannibal placed his African veterans, 8,000 of his best troops, many wearing captured Roman armor. But he positioned them slightly behind the center, creating a recessed line. They wouldn't engage immediately. They'd wait. His cavalry he split between both wings. Hasdrubal commanded 6,000 Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry on the left. Maharbal led 3,000 Numidian light cavalry on the right. 9,000 horsemen total, facing Rome's 6,000. The Roman deployment was exactly what Hannibal expected. A massive rectangular block of heavy infantry in the center, 80 ranks deep. Deeper than normal Roman formations, they were concentrating their overwhelming numerical advantage into an irresistible battering ram. Roman cavalry split between the wings, outnumbered but not catastrophically so. Everything favored Rome. More infantry, better armor, proven discipline. Fighting on open ground where their traditional tactics had dominated for centuries. Hannibal should have been terrified. Instead, according to sources, he was relaxed, almost cheerful. His officers asked how he could be so confident facing such overwhelming force. Hannibal pointed at the Roman army and said something his men didn't understand. "I don't see one man there named Gisco." It was a joke. A strange, cryptic joke. His officers didn't get it. They would. In about 3 hours, when every single one of those Romans was either dead or begging for mercy, they'd understand perfectly. The names didn't matter. Because Hannibal had set a trap so perfect that individual courage, individual skill, individual anything wouldn't make the slightest difference. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering how this turns into catastrophe, hit that like button and comment what you think is about to happen. Because the next hour will demonstrate why Cannae is still studied as the perfect tactical victory. The battle opened on the wings. Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry crashed into the Roman horsemen in brutal, close-quarters fighting. These weren't elegant cavalry charges from romantic movies. This was grinding, desperate combat. Horses colliding, riders stabbing at each other with swords and spears, men falling and being trampled. The Carthaginian cavalry was better. Better riders, more experienced, motivated by years of victory. The Roman cavalry fought bravely. They weren't cowards, but they were outmatched. Slowly they were pushed back. Then they broke, fled. Hasdrubal didn't pursue. That's what matters. That's what separates good cavalry from great cavalry. He didn't chase fleeing enemies for easy kills. He maintained discipline, reorganized his riders, and prepared for the next phase of Hannibal's plan. On the opposite flank, the Numidian light cavalry engaged the Roman allied cavalry differently. Skirmishing, feinting, drawing them away from the main battle. The Numidians were masters of this hit and run, never committing to decisive combat, always staying just out of reach. And in the center, the main event began. 87,000 Roman infantry advanced against Hannibal's bulging center line. The ground shook under their feet. The noise was deafening, thousands of men tramping in rhythm, officers shouting orders, trumpets blaring signals. When they struck Hannibal's Gallic and Spanish infantry, physics took over. The Romans pushed forward. The Carthaginian center, outnumbered and outmatched, began giving ground. To the Romans, it looked like victory unfolding exactly as planned. They were driving the enemy back. Hannibal's line was bending under pressure. Keep pushing and they'd break through completely. So they pushed harder, concentrated more troops into the center, seeking the breakthrough that would vindicate their strategy and end this war. They couldn't see what was happening on their flanks. The dust, the chaos, the sheer mass of men, it created a fog of war where the only reality was what was directly in front of you. And what was in front of them was Hannibal's center retreating, exactly as he'd planned. The convex curve of Hannibal's center bent backward under Roman pressure. Gradually, steadily, forming a concave shape, like a pocket, like a bowl. The Romans pushed into that depression, their formation becoming denser, more concentrated. They were so focused on the breakthrough they thought was coming that they stopped paying attention to anything else. This was exactly what Hannibal wanted. Hannibal's African infantry had been waiting in their slightly recessed positions. Fresh, disciplined, watching the Romans push deeper into the pocket. Now they moved. The African units pivoted inward and struck the Roman flanks. Both sides simultaneously. These weren't desperate attacks. They were controlled, coordinated strikes by professional soldiers executing a plan they'd rehearsed. At the same moment, Hasdrubal's cavalry, having destroyed the Roman horsemen on one flank, rode across the battlefield behind the Roman army and struck the allied cavalry from behind. That cavalry force, already engaged with the Numidians, was caught between two fires. They collapsed, scattered, died. Hasdrubal's cavalry was now free to complete the encirclement. They rode around and struck the Roman infantry from the rear. In the span of perhaps 10 minutes, maybe less, the entire tactical situation transformed completely. The Romans, who thought they were winning, who believed they were moments away from breaking through Hannibal's center, suddenly found themselves surrounded. 87,000 men packed into a killing zone with enemies on all sides. What followed wasn't really a battle. Not in any traditional sense. There was systematic butchery. The Romans were packed so tightly, remember they deployed 80 ranks deep and then concentrated even further pushing into Hannibal's center, that they couldn't maneuver, couldn't form defensive positions, couldn't even swing their weapons effectively. Men in the outer ranks fought desperately, trying to break out, dying by the hundreds. Men in the center couldn't reach the enemy at all. They just stood there, pressed together by the mass of bodies around them, waiting their turn to die as the ranks ahead of them were slaughtered. The Carthaginians crushed the pocket inward from all directions. It wasn't driven by rage or bloodlust. It was cold, tactical efficiency. Hannibal's troops would kill until exhausted, then rotate to fresh troops, then resume killing. Hour after hour. The summer heat was unbearable. August in southern Italy. The air filled with dust and the stench of blood and open bowels and fear. Men begged for water, for mercy, for death to come quickly. Consul Paulus, the cautious commander who'd argued against fighting today, died in the center of the formation. According to sources, he was offered horses to escape. He refused. He chose to die with the soldiers he'd led into this disaster. Consul Varro, the aggressive commander whose decision to fight had created this catastrophe, escaped with a handful of cavalry. He would live with that shame for the rest of his life. For 8 hours, from mid-morning to late afternoon, the killing continued. By sunset, 70,000 Romans were dead. 10,000 more captured. Only a few thousand escaped. Hannibal's casualties, approximately 6,000 men. Think about that. 6,000 losses to annihilate the largest army Rome had ever fielded. A force half the size had destroyed Rome's numerical superiority so completely that historians still struggle to describe it adequately. After the battle, Hannibal's cavalry commander Hannibal rode to his general with urgent advice. "March on Rome now. Give me the cavalry, and in 5 days you'll be feasting in the capital." Then he added something that would echo through history: "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal. You don't know how to use one." It's the great what-if of ancient history. If Hannibal had marched on Rome immediately after Cannae, while the city was defenseless, demoralized, paralyzed with fear, could he have ended the war? Could he have conquered the city itself? Hannibal refused. He didn't have siege equipment adequate for Rome's walls. His army, despite the victory, was exhausted. And Rome's defensive position was formidable. Taking the city might cost him everything he'd preserved. Some historians argue this was Hannibal's greatest mistake, the moment when ultimate victory slipped through his fingers. Others contend he made the correct military decision. A failed siege would have destroyed his army's aura of invincibility. We'll never know who was right. Comment below. Do you think Hannibal should have marched on Rome? Or was he right to refuse? Because this decision might have cost him the war. Any other nation would have surrendered. Any rational government, having lost 70,000 men in a single afternoon, would have sued for peace on whatever terms they could get. Rome's Senate refused. They wouldn't even acknowledge Hannibal's envoys who came to negotiate prisoner exchanges. They passed a law forbidding any discussion of peace while foreign armies remained on Italian soil. They ransomed back captured soldiers, except those who'd shown cowardice or surrendered too easily. Those men were exiled. Rome didn't want survivors who'd failed to die fighting. Then they did something that still astonishes historians. They levied new armies. Armed slaves. Mobilized boys barely old enough to carry a sword. Stripped Italy of every available man and formed new legions. And they prepared to keep fighting. No matter how many times they lost. No matter how impossible victory seemed. It was insane. It was prideful. It violated every principle of rational statecraft. And it was the most brilliant strategic decision of the entire war. Hannibal had achieved the impossible. He'd crossed the Alps with elephants. He'd defeated 3 Roman armies in 2 years. He'd just annihilated the largest military force Rome had ever assembled using tactical genius that remains unmatched in military history. But Rome wouldn't surrender. They wouldn't negotiate. They wouldn't even admit that defeat was possible. Hannibal had won every battle. But he was about to discover something that would eventually destroy him. Winning battles isn't the same as winning wars. Because Rome had one weapon Hannibal couldn't counter, one advantage that tactical genius couldn't overcome: the absolute, stubborn, arguably insane refusal to accept defeat no matter how catastrophically they lost. That refusal would turn Hannibal's greatest victory into the beginning of his ultimate defeat. And the next 13 years would prove that sometimes, the side that loses every battle can still win the war.